Hello guys, today we'll look at different lines and types of alcohol inks. We'll get to know their features better and explore different ways of working with alcohol inks. First, I want to point out that alcohol inks dry very quickly, the alcohol evaporates, and the dye left behind creates the actual artwork. As the alcohol moves, the dye spreads evenly across the surface we're painting on. While with traditional paints, we usually use a brush to spread the color, here we use air. Air becomes our brush. The most commonly used tools are a hairdryer and an air pump. I use a hot air brush or curling dryer without the nozzle. It's easy to hold and usually not too powerful. I recommend finding one with a cold air setting, because cold air is easier to work with, especially on plastic surfaces like synthetic or plastic paper, which can deform under hot air. This kind of air pump, originally meant for blowing dust off keyboards and lenses, also works great. I'd even say you could replace a dryer with it, though it's better suited for smaller pieces. Today I'll be using synthetic paper as a base. It's smooth and non-absorbent. It's a classic, the most convenient material for working with inks. You can easily roll or cut it to size, and it's easy to clean off any mistakes. But as I mentioned earlier, if the dryer is too hot, the paper may warp. So cold or warm air is better, be careful with high heat. To dilute the inks, you can use 99% isopropyl alcohol or our blending solution. I'll talk more about it later in the video. There are several different lines of alcohol inks in the range. This one, for example, is the pastel line based on both dye and pigment, a kind of hybrid. It includes 16 different shades. This is the classic dye-based line. These inks are highly saturated and concentrated. They have a very light, semi-transparent texture. Each line has its own label, which makes them easy to tell apart. So they are very easy to tell apart. These, for example, are metallic and pearlescent shades of alcohol inks. Pearlescent inks are almost transparent, but when light refracts or on dark surfaces, they appear as glowing shades similar to dragonfly wings. Metallic inks create beautiful metallic effects similar to a web. So what are powder line inks or pastel alcohol inks? If you remove the label, you can see that the liquid separates into two phases. One has settled at the bottom, and the other fills the bottle above. The ink needs to be thoroughly shaken to achieve a uniform consistency and work properly. There's a ball inside the bottle, and we shake until we hear that sharp clicking sound of the ball inside. These inks must be shaken very well before use. These inks are more opaque, and they can also be used on dark surfaces. They look beautiful on black. Many people are often surprised that the ink shown on the label is one shade, while in the bottle it looks much lighter. For example, I'm showing you now. In the bottle the shade looks very light, almost white, but on the label it's much darker. And now I'll show you why and how it actually looks. I pour the ink straight from the bottle, and we can see that the color is quite light. At first glance it doesn't match the label, but once we dry it with a hairdryer we can see the colors start to appear. And now the color has developed. Then we compare it to the liquid form and we see the difference. So the ink in the bottle and the dried ink look completely different. Now let's briefly look at metallic inks. We have a more detailed video about them, and I highly recommend watching it. Here I want to show that there is also pigment inside, although it's not very visible through the bottle, not as easy to see, but pigment still settles at the bottom. The ink must be shaken well before use, until you hear the metallic ball rattling inside. Now I'll quickly show you how these inks look. I'll just pour them out and dry them with a hairdryer so you can see how shiny they are. They have a precious metal-like shine because they contain real metallic pigment. They look beautiful on paintings, artists love them. Now I want to show two ways to apply ink to the paper. First method, pour the ink directly onto the paper from the bottle, dilute with alcohol or blending solution and dry it. I'm showing how easily the ink can be wiped off with alcohol and a tissue. I'm doing this on purpose so you know, if something goes wrong, you can just wipe it off and paint again. Second method, pour the ink into a cup and dilute it to the desired consistency. This way you get an evenly tinted liquid, pour it out and dry it with a hairdryer. I want to demonstrate two of the most popular drying techniques. If you're a beginner ink artist, you can practice these and get really good results. Then it'll be much easier to work in this technique. First method, dry the drop in a circular motion. Pay attention to how I hold the hairdryer parallel to the paper and at a certain distance from the wet ink. I dry it in circles and the result looks like a petal or flower. The drying process was done in a circular motion. The dryer was 1-2 centimeters away from the wet drop, and as it dried I moved the dryer closer. That's how I worked. Now I'll make a quick sketch to show what I just demonstrated. I dry the drop in 2 half circles, closing it into a full circle, first from one side, then from the other. I don't let the ink escape from the circle, this forms a neat round spot. The distance from the dryer is always at least 1 centimeter. I always hold the dryer perpendicular to the paper, drying the ink in a circle. That's method 1. Second method, the path. I dry the ink from the base and don't close the circle. This way, the ink flows in a controlled direction wherever I guide it. I dry the tip, the edge, make a half circle and guide the drop a bit. I can add more later. I decided to wipe off the excess with a tissue because I don't want to continue the path now, just showing you a sketch. So I didn't close the circle, it was a half circle. That was a path, and I used the same distance rule and held the dryer parallel to the paper. That's method number 2. I recommend testing both drying techniques. You can extend the path endlessly, and the main goal in both techniques is to make the ink dry evenly. That's something you get better at with practice. You can also use an air pump. If you're working on a small piece, it's convenient. Same principle, circular or semicircular motion. And this brings us to something every beginner in alcohol inks faces: common technique mistakes. It's incorrect to dry the ink in the center with a hairdryer chaotically and from a very close distance. This leads to unwanted results. It's wrong to pour the ink straight from the bottle without using a blending solution. That creates heavy blotches like this. If you want to pour the ink directly, use a blending solution. Pour the blending solution first, then the ink, and dry. That way you'll get light, airy transitions typical for alcohol inks. When you're working with the dryer and want to add more ink, it's wrong to add ink and continue drying immediately. This can cause splashes and ruin the whole artwork. The result may be disappointing. Now let's take a look at the nude line of inks, also known as pastel shades of alcohol inks. They must be mixed with a blending solution in a cup before use, because there are certain specifics in how they work, so make sure to mix them before using. Shake the bottles well. As I mentioned earlier, there's a ball inside, the pigment is heavy and settles at the bottom, so you absolutely need to shake the bottle thoroughly before use. I've shaken these inks well in advance, and now I'm pouring a small amount into the cup and mixing them with blending solution at a ratio of 1:3 or 4. That's enough, but if you want it more concentrated, you can go with 1:2 or 3. Then I pour it onto the paper. Next, I dry it using the root method I showed earlier in the video. This means I dry the ink from the bottom, pushing it forward gently. If it flows too fast, I can stop it by closing the circle. But the main task is to dry the lower part with a half sphere motion, fixing the shape. So I dry, fix, and I push the ink forward. These nude inks are thicker, you can feel it when you work with them. I'm pushing them forward now and drying them. This way I get a very interesting shape. The route can go on endlessly, but I've decided to stop here and see what I've got. What kind of shape I created with pastel inks. To get this kind of shape, again remember, dry from the bottom and guide the wet ink along the desired path. If you decide to go to the left, the half sphere should gradually change angle, and that's how you create the route. You can add more ink and the route will continue as long as you want. That's the result we got. I really love pastel shades. They work beautifully with both the classic ink line and metallic inks. Now let's take a look at what blending solution is and what it's used for. We'll compare it to regular alcohol. In one hand I have regular alcohol and in the other blending solution. I pour the regular alcohol and right next to it the blending solution. Then I add ink into both liquids and dry them with a hairdryer. Now let's compare. Both spots dried in approximately the same way. I rubbed the dried area where regular alcohol was used. This one was created using alcohol, and on the other side I rubbed the area made with blending solution. As you can see, the spot where alcohol was used rubs off, and where blending solution was used, it doesn't come off that easily. Also, the color looks slightly different. The color with blending solution is a bit more saturated. That's because it contains a varnish. So keep in mind, if you paint with alcohol, you'll need to seal your artwork with a varnish. But if you use blending solution, it's not necessary. The choice is yours. We recommend watching the second part of our lesson where I show a secret technique for creating marble effects with alcohol inks. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to give it a like.